Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Wednesday webinar with us at Strove. We're really looking forward to today's session, which I'll introduce in a second. I'll first tell you who's leading us through this, but I'm going to introduce PJ Claassen. PJ, thank you very much for joining us today and giving up some of your time. PJ has been part of our network for years now. He's a research psychologist and co-owner of PurposeWorks, now also a published author, which I'll tell you about in a second. And a lot of his work focuses on organization culture, leadership development and performance coaching. He does a lot of that with users of Strove and our platform and our talk feature, always a very highly rated coach of ours. And he's recently published a book. I've read that, I think it was in your bio, PJ, that you described yourself as having an above average love for the Springboks, which in South Africa, average is pretty high. So above average is something special. And today's session is inspired by a book that goes along those lines, which is called The Bok Way, which PJ is going to tell us all about. Recently published, available in retailers at the moment and doing really well. So perfectly suited to guide us through this. And today we're going to explore what we can learn from behind the scenes within the Bok camp. We know how successful they have been recently, not just on the field, but creating culture and essentially a healthy organization and high-performing team, and how we can maybe take those lessons along into our own day-to-day lives and what we can take from all of that. So join me in welcoming PJ. Thank you again for your time. And guys, if you've got any questions, please pop them into the chat as we go, and we'll swing back into a little Q&A towards the end. PJ, over to you.
Thank you, sir. So I said to Adrian before we started, I've never tried to do all of this in 45 minutes. I'm going to do my best because there's a lot of stuff in there and I get really amped about this content. So I'll share the highlights following the structure of the book, which, as I said, is called The Bok Way. And I'd like to kick this off with, why is this applicable? Why does this matter? And as an individual, thinking of yourself, is it more important to be smart in terms of clever or healthy? And I think most of us would say, well, we want to be both, because if you are just one or the other, you're not going to be ideally suited or optimally positioned to be your best. The thing is, with organizations, in the line of work that we do, we find that most organizations are way more worried about being smart than they are about being healthy. And the reason that I use the Springboks as a case study for this type of work that we do is because people talk about Rassie and they say, the man's a genius. He's clever. He thinks he's way ahead of everybody. They are obviously smarter than the opposition. That's only the one part. Getting into the thick of things, talking to them, the people who work in that environment, which I'll share shortly, you get the impression that they are as focused on being healthy as they are being smart. They want to create an environment that brings out the best in people, in which people can do fantastic work. They pay a lot of attention to that. And the majority of my book focuses not on the smart component of how they actually play rugby. That's not the point. That is not what most people are going to benefit from. The focus is on how do they create a healthy environment in which people can do their best work and which people love being a part of. And they are happy to run through a wall in order to do their job. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. So just as an intro, the people that I spoke with personally, these are people that worked in this environment since 2018. Steven Kitshoff played until 2024. He had to stop playing because he broke his neck. He won 2 World Cups. Jacques Nienaber, sat down with him in person. What a fantastic guy. He won 2 World Cups. One as assistant coach, one as head coach. Francois Louw played in 2019, won 2019 World Cup. Played 80 test matches for the Springboks. Scott Brits, he played 2019, captained the Boks. Fantastic guy. I saw him last week again. He's a wonderful human. And Anneli Murray is a lady that many people don't know of. She worked for the Boks as the PR manager for 20 years, between 2000 and 2020. She has more than 300 Springbok caps behind her name. She worked with 7 coaches. She has 2 World Cup medals. She knows the Springboks through and through. She still works with a lot of the players in their personal capacity. So I spoke with them, but then also listened to a bunch of interviews, which included the following people on the screen. There might have been somebody that I missed, but the sources that I used to compile the insights of this book comes from their own mouths, understanding the way that they talk about the way that the culture works and the team works and the environment works. So I really try to get as much in-depth information. And if there's anything that I couldn't get from the things that I listened to, I got to ask these guys personally, how does this thing work? And they were incredibly open to sharing the way that the team thinks and the way they operate and how they handle whatever comes their way. So the way in which I compiled this was, the book has 3 main sections. The first component, the first section, speaks to the way that they think about themselves, how they see themselves. Then the second component speaks to the people stuff, how they treat each other. And the third section speaks to the execution, how they do things. So there are 3 components beneath each of them, 9 in total. This is the outline of the book. And I'm going to go through these 9 components as best I can in the amount of time available to give you an idea of what it is that they do that makes them successful in the first place, but combining the smart and the healthy into one thing that makes them to be the best team in the world currently. And they've been for a number of years. And they will likely, going into the World Cup next year, be the favorites again. So the first thing they are incredibly good at is understanding why this team exists. And this is something that is applicable. So all of these things that I'm going to be talking about are applicable to each and every business that exists as well. It's having a clear and concise and shared understanding of why does this organization, this team, this company, this school, this church, whatever it might be, why does it exist? The first time that I came across this was 1995. All of these photos, I was 10 years old when we played the 95 World Cup. And the team had this slogan of one team, one country. And it was the year after the first election. I mean, it was still a pretty much divided country. They were the first guys who saw this opportunity of, let's use rugby to unite the nation. And we've come a long way in terms of this. And it's still a message that this specific Bok team uses a lot. When we talk about what makes for a good why does this organization, this team exist? There are 3 things that come from Pat Lencioni that he talks about, that within your organization, you need to understand these things. It doesn't have to be a unique reason to exist. I mean, it's difficult to find a unique reason for you to exist as a company or a team on your own. It's not a thing that needs to differentiate you, but it is something that people need to understand. And it is something that people need to buy into. And they're only going to buy into this if it is absolutely true. So if you tell your customers that your company exists because you want to serve them, but you are actually there to create as much profit as possible, people are going to see through that. It is about, if you want to make a lot of money, just be upfront about that. Just say, this is why we're doing this. So that everybody in the organization understands this is the aim that we are going after. Most organizations, people who work there, don't really know why it exists. They just go to work to do what they do, going through the motions. So there's no real emotional connection to what they do. And the third important thing about this is to communicate it continuously. This is something that the Springboks do all the time. And in talking to the individuals, they say to me, Steven Kitshoff, for example, said, Monday morning analysis, when they watch the game, somebody did something stupid, gave away a stupid penalty. The coaches tell you, you let your country down by doing that. If you do something exceptional, they say you made your country proud. When they're on the field, somebody seems to be getting a bit slow. They will tell each other, doing it for your country. Get up, come on. And they G each other up to be able to do that. They are completely convinced that what they are doing is for the country. This is a really cool example from a South African company. And when the first time that I saw the slogan on the side of one of their trucks, I really liked this, where they say, people who care make things better. So I went to the Sasco website, and they have a nice piece about having written this down. Who are the people that they care about? And they claim to say that everything they do is about showing care. I don't know if that's true. I think this is a really cool thing to throw your weight behind. And the way in which they articulate it is really nice. I hope that they do this because it gives something to people to buy into. And I thought this was a really cool example of, getting people behind a specific idea of why are we doing what we are doing. When it comes to the box, it's absolutely clear. It's for South Africa. It is not about winning. It is creating hope. It is creating an example of things can work. It is creating an example of we can work together to be successful. These people are absolutely convinced that they are doing it for the country. It's more than the BOK jersey. It is for all South Africans across the world. And that is something that unites them. That's something that they start off with, which gives them a head start. Right, that's the first thing. How do they think about themselves? They play for the country. So the best teams and organizations know exactly why they exist, and they remind each other constantly. So at the end of each chapter in my book, I have this takeaway. It makes it easy for you to digest and remember. That's what my organization and my team needs to kick off. Second thing, they know exactly what they value. They know exactly what the type of person is that will be a good team member. All companies have values. They are pretty much put up in the foyer somewhere. Most people you ask don't know what their company values are. That is our personal experience. And if they know what the values are, they don't really know why they matter because nobody behaves according to them. This is my favorite example, probably, Steinhoff, the South African example again. I went to the internet to look at what the Steinhoff values were. So they don't have a website anymore, but I could find these. And the number one value was stakeholder responsibility. Now, this is a company where the main management of the company lost and stole upwards of 300 billion rand of other people's money. And they said the number one value was stakeholder responsibility, which they said was demonstrating awareness and responsibility towards shareholders, customers, business partners, and the communities in which we operate. They did exactly the opposite to that. What the BOKs do in terms of values is, if you've watched Chasing the Sun, if you watch pretty much any interview where the players are featured, they would mention this. We don't want the best players, we want the right players. So I asked Jacques Minnaar about this. And he said they have a selection criteria when they look at a player to be part of the box, which has 14 things on it. So I can't see your responses now. Typically when I talk to people, I ask them, where on the list of 14 things would you think ranks how well this player plays rugby? I would typically think that would be number one. The BOKs have that as number 12. They don't care about how well you play if you are not the type of person that will be a good player within that team. The number one thing they look at is whether you are a warrior. And the reason I have Kwagga there is probably the most warrior person you could find. The cool thing about being a warrior is they have articulated this in a way that makes it measurable in where they look at work rate and battle stats. So it essentially comes down to how much effort are you willing to put in on the field. And they can track that and they can measure that. So that is how they see whether you are actually living out the values. Now, there are other things on that criteria as well, which I won't get into all of them. But one of the other ones also is taking ownership. In most South African rugby teams, it's about the coach has to do it for me. It's the same way in businesses. We look at the leaders doing it for me very often. They make you responsible for your own contribution, for your own development, for your own getting better at your skill set. It's your responsibility. You need to own that. If you are willing to own that, you are allowed to be a part of the team. And the third thing, which is very essential within this team, is, are you willing to put aside your ego to the benefit of the team? that's the one thing that will make them drop you, is if you start feeling that you are more important than the rest of the team. So for example, if somebody gets pulled off the field early because it's not going well and they need to replace you, you can sulk for a very short period of time before you need to get over that, because you need to understand it's not about you, it's about the team. And this is just a small snapshot of the way that they look at things, but it's a cool view into how they make their values practical so that they can look at the actual behavior that they want to see displayed within the environment. In terms of how you can do this yourself, is the way that the Boks have done it is bake your values into everything that you do. So we ask companies, they have values in their foyer. Have you ever fired anybody for not living up to these values? Would you be willing to do that? Most don't. If you're not willing to fire somebody for not living up to them, then it means that you don't really care about them. Are they an essential part of the way that you conduct yourself every day? Do the leaders set the tone? Do the leaders actually live these values? That is another thing. Typically, people would say to us, no. And then as a result, people see it as hypocrisy, and then they don't do it themselves. The leaders in this environment set the tone in terms of that, in terms of their hard work and their effort, and the players willingly follow them. And what makes it very useful is to know what it looks like practically. How can I live up to this? How can I display it on a daily basis? It doesn't really work if it's an abstract notion. Something like integrity, for example, it looks different to different people. If you make it practical, like we always tell the truth, irrespective of the cost, that is the type of thing that will make it more practical. You turn it into a verb type of way of going about it. Looking at people who live it as good examples, bringing that into your culture and talking about these examples makes a big difference. So they know why the team exists. They know the type of people that they are looking for. First two components. So as the third takeaway, they have a clear identity. They act in accordance with the values they profess to care about, and hire people who do the same. You want to bring people in, care about the same things. They're absolutely going to look different. They're going to come from different backgrounds, but you need them to care about the same things so that they can aim in the same direction. Fourth component is there's a unified mindset. So I have the picture of Eben there looking like foolish, but they're playing and they're learning, and they don't let ego get in the way. The way that they do this is, and I use Dan Carter there as an example, in my opinion, probably the best rugby player that I've ever seen. Somebody who's regarded as a genius. And the idea of a genius is, often we think of them as they're just born that way. Dan Carter came out the womb, rugby genius, handsome, fast, quick decision-making, everything, the finished package. When you listen to him talk, that's not true whatsoever. What happens in organizations is geniuses tend to place themselves. They can sometimes be the most influential people, and everybody defers to them. Where we start looking at, that is the in crowd. That is the group of people that are the most influential, and you are either in the small in group or you are outside of that. What that leads to is, I'll come back to this slide, is cultures of genius, which sound like good things. The reason I included these two guys, Damian Willemse and Sasha, is they look like geniuses. They look like natural talents that are just fantastic at what they do. But we don't know how much hard work they actually put in to be as good as they are. So in cultures of genius, which happens in companies, is we tend to overemphasize innate talent, which causes people to operate from a fixed mindset, because those are the people that are good and everybody else are the people that are not good. So we get stuck in that mindset. This leads to a fear of failure, which creates unhealthy competition within organizations instead of collaboration. People are not willing to share with each other and learn from each other. People don't like feedback. They don't share feedback, and they avoid risks because only the geniuses have a say. And everybody else, if you are not seen as a genius, you just have to shut up and do your job, which is not essentially the truth. So what the Boks are really good at is creating a culture of growth. Now, Manie, probably one of the most polarizing players in the team, because he's either brilliant, and he can be incredibly brilliant, or he can make a bunch of mistakes. And people tend to overemphasize the mistakes that he makes. And kicking for poles he misses. He is exceptionally brilliant, this guy, but not in the mold of these guys who seem to be the natural talents. He is more of a guy that has had to develop. But the Boks are really fantastic at seeing potential and developing it. And they instill a growth mindset where everybody is responsible for taking ownership to continuously get better. It doesn't matter if you are Eben, if you've played 125 test matches. It doesn't matter if you are Sia or if you are the newest kid in the team. Your job is to get better. And they help each and every player with something they call roadmaps, where they know exactly what they need to be working on. And it's then their responsibility to go work on that. So when we work with companies, we ask them, do you have these things in place where your people know exactly what they need to be doing in order to enhance their contribution and to improve their skill set? The other way in which the Boks do it, and which organizations typically don't do it as well, is honest and robust feedback. We prefer to be nice. We prefer to not tell people the absolute truth, whether it will be to their benefit or not. But it's the only way that we can see our blind spots and actually work on them if we are getting honest feedback on our actual performance. Something that the Boks are really good at, and they do this purposefully, and they started doing this after 2018, they still do it now, is no in groups, no cliques allowed. Senior players are not allowed to just hang with themselves. They are given the responsibility to take care of everybody within the team. You need to know everybody within the environment. What happens within groups is that they form, and then the result is there are out groups everywhere else, where people feel that they're not getting information and they don't have a voice. The Boks do that deliberately to make sure that everybody can be heard and feel a sense of belonging and share their knowledge and their skill. And one example that I go into a lot of detail into in the book was the first home test match that the Boks played under Rassie and Jacques Nobber in 2018 was against England. And the Boks fell behind very quickly in the game, 21-0, I think. Can't remember the scores. And everybody was panicking. Well, in the stands and on the TV and on the couch, we were panicking. But it was a process of learning, and they ended up winning that game. And I asked Ninobe, Kitshoff, everybody about that who was playing there. And it was just about, it's okay, we're still learning how this is working. We're still learning how to do this. And it is this constant mindset towards growing, developing. I'm not the finished product as a team or as an individual, which makes them so brilliant, in my opinion. So one thing that's really cool about, I'll single out one thing, is the way that they look at mistakes, errors. They have a 3-type system where they do analysis of the match. Everybody sits there and they see a guy missing a tackle, for example, or being out of position. So they figure out, is this a system error? System error means I did not understand my place in the system. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. If that's the case, there's a 50-50 responsibility on the player and coach to figure that out. I need to learn, but you're going to help me learn. That's the first one. The second one is the skill error. Maybe I miss a tackle because I don't know how to make the tackle. There again, 50-50. The coach is going to teach you to tackle, but you're going to have to practice it. It's your job. That's also a understandable error. They don't mind that. The third component, which they frown at this is probably the thing that's going to get you dropped, is an effort error. If you're lazy, if you're not putting in the work, if you don't get up off the floor quick enough, that is something that's within your control. That is part of the warrior mindset of, I need to put in the effort. And effort is applicable in all environments. So I think as a manager, for example, you need to think about if the people in your team are struggling. System error, do they understand what they need to do? Do they have the skill to do that, or are they just not putting in the effort? that's for you to figure out. That's one really cool thing that they do, which I thought was very insightful. So, once again, takeaway. Best teams and organizations, everyone is a work in progress. There are no geniuses. Nobody rests on their laurels, and the focus is on helping each other improve. They are exceptionally good at helping each other get better at teaching. Get to that later on. So those are the first three components in terms of how they think about themselves. They understand the purpose of the team. They know what their identity is and who they are, and they are constantly growing. They have the same mindset regarding continuous improvement. The next component, the people component. Starting off with the importance of trust. Now, if somebody's going to jack you into the air that high, you need to be able to trust that they're not going to drop you. And trust, as we always say, is the foundation of every healthy relationship, every healthy culture. I know I can trust people, or I know I trust them already when I visit their house. And as soon as I walk in the door, I feel comfortable to take my shoes off. That's how I know these are my people. I don't have to hide anything from them. And so we ask organizations, the people around which you work, are you comfortable enough to take your shoes off? It just is a figurative way of saying, are you comfortable enough to let your guard down? You know that you don't need to be watching your back. You can just be yourself around these people. And when we are deciding on who we can trust, we are going to look at typically two things. Is firstly the character of the person, or the character of the people within the team. Are the people with integrity? Do they have good intentions? Are there motives towards benefiting or harming me? And are they people of good moral fiber? We start off there. Then we also look at their competence. Do they have the skill and ability to deliver to what they promise? This is true for everybody that we come across, I believe. If you go and you park your car and you look at the car guard, you are going to judge whether this person has these. Although we do it instantaneously, can I trust you? And our brain is calculating whether this is in place. Now, trust starts when, and the box do this well, there's vulnerability. Now, this is a massive chapter on its own. It's going to be quite difficult to go through all of this here. But when you are modeling as a leader, for example, that you are comfortable admitting mistakes, or when you don't know the answer, or when you need help. I had a question from somebody last week that said, do these leaders really say they don't know? Do these leaders really ask for help? These guys in this team, absolutely they do. They told me how it works. And it's so counterintuitive because we expect leaders to be able to know everything. And leaders expect of themselves to be able to know everything already and not admit mistakes and never be wrong, because we think people are looking for perfect examples. While we know that we are not perfect examples. But trust only forms when there's actual vulnerability around. There are some things that I don't know. There are some things that I need help with. And I need your help to help me with it. Then people buy in. They are also really good at having robust discussions. They do everything out in the open, most things, except for team selection. They don't hide anything. They have disagreements. They argue. Sounds counterintuitive, but arguing in a healthy way, having healthy conflict, is something that builds trust. Something that destroys trust is gossip, where people are not comfortable to have disagreements, but they have it behind closed doors or around the corner. That destroys trust immediately. And you would know this from your own experience as well. And they deliberately create an environment in which people feel safe. Although the work they do is not necessarily safe, they make each other feel welcome and like they belong, and they bring people in. This is a quote that I took from Daniel Coyle. It's a book that came out about 5 years ago. That says, one misconception about highly successful cultures, I absolutely agree with this, is that they're happy, light-hearted places. So you would think that a healthy culture is one where people are always smiling and laughing, and there is harmony on the surface. But often that harmony can be fake. This is mostly not the case. They are energized and engaged, which means that people can butt heads every now and again, and you would expect them to. But at their core, their members are oriented less around achieving happiness than around solving hard problems together. The reason that I used this picture as an example of solving a hard problem together was, this was the team, the first team This was 2018. The first team in 9, almost to the day 10 years, that tried to beat the All Blacks in New Zealand. That is a hard problem to solve because beating these guys in New Zealand is a difficult thing. This was a really strong New Zealand team, and these guys did it. The previous year, they lost by 50 points to New Zealand in New Zealand. The next year, they beat them there in Wellington. So they were there to solve a hard problem together, and that set them on course for World Cup success the next year. So as a takeaway, in the best teams and organizations, the importance of trust is never underestimated. It is a vital business imperative that continuous and relentless work should be done by everyone to build, strengthen, and protect this trust. This is where everything starts and finishes. If the people in the organization don't trust each other, you will never reach full potential. I don't care what anybody else says. This is where it starts. The same thing in any relationship, in any group of people trying to do anything together. It starts with trust. And these guys trust each other. And if there's a ripple, they fix it as soon as they can. The leader set the tone. So like I said, I was lucky to talk to this leader. Jacques Nienaber is a wonderful man. So down to earth. He's one of the best coaches in the world. But just talking to him, he has no ego whatsoever. He's fantastic. So they do this by sharing the load while ensuring alignment. We talk a lot to leaders about why they want to be a leader. And it comes down to essentially 2 primary distinctive motivations. It's either I want to lead because I want to be rewarded. I want the status and the power and the financial gain and the benefits and recognition and the popularity that goes with being a leader. Or I'm going to do it because I want to take on the responsibility. I have a duty to serve, to develop people, to tackle tough challenges, hold myself and others accountable. This is the better one. That one is the short-term thinking one, the reward. So Jacques Nienaber said this to me, that what Rassie said, so they were working in Ireland before they came back to South Africa to coach the Boks. They were coaching Munster. Nice, pussy job. They could do that for the next 20 years. People would leave them alone. And he said to me that, Rassie said, we can bitch and moan about the situation where the Boks were losing terribly, or we can do something about it. And they believed they could do something about it. So they went the responsibility route. I was laughing at an example 2 weeks ago. It shows the difference between these reasons for leading. The mayor of Joburg, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, was at Harvard University doing a talk on how to govern a city. Mayor of Joburg. That was while Helen Zille was scuba diving and canoeing in the potholes in his city. It shows a fantastic view of what happens when somebody is reward-oriented. And these guys are a fantastic example of somebody being responsibility-oriented. It's great being the Boks coach when the Boks are winning. But as they start losing, it becomes really difficult. The benefits run out quickly because we are very demanding. So it starts with them. Then, what do they do differently? Extreme transparency. They tell people the truth, the brutal, honest truth to your face. There's nowhere to hide. You know exactly where you stand. There's a constant focus on alignment. For example, cool example, they videotape all practices, everything, and they watch it afterwards, the coaches. So Kitshoff said, let's say, for example, they are doing something and the scrum falls while they are practicing, and somebody gets up and he shakes his head. They will ask you in front of the entire team, why did you shake your head? What don't you agree with? And it is your responsibility early in the week to say, I don't think this is a good plan. I don't think we should do it this way. I think we should do it this way. Everybody is asked, everybody is allowed to give their opinion. Everybody is expected to give their opinion if they don't agree. But then you have to come up with a plan and you need to say, I think we should rather do this. And then they will talk about it. And then they decide and they say, we are doing this thing. And then everybody has to get behind that plan. That is alignment. Because if people, even privately, don't agree with a plan, they are not going to execute on that. And that is why something like the Stronger Together is a real thing. This comes from the team. Anley Murray told me they came up with this, and then it went through the marketing people, it went public. There's accountability. Everybody's expected to contribute. There's no such thing as the coach will do it, I will do this, and just sit back and be spoon-fed. That is something that they changed. And everybody is trustworthy and trusted. They trust each other to act like adults. A fantastic example is most other international teams, before a test match, the players' wives are not allowed to stay with them in the hotels. They have to be in other hotels. Some teams even set specific, they need to be 5 kilometers away type of rules. These guys stay with their wives, with their kids, because they trust them. You're adults, you know what you need to be able to perform. I'm not going to babysit you. If you don't perform, you don't play. But you've done it before, so I'm going to trust you to know what it is that you need to be doing to be at your best. This is different. So, once again, large chapters shrunk into 3 slides. In the best teams and organizations, leaders trust their people enough to empower them to think, act, and contribute to the best of their current ability, while they are pushing and encouraging them to reach the next level. And they help them get there. They coach them. We invest in people. We develop them. This is done through inspiration rather than control. I didn't say much about the control part. That's in the book. For the sake of time, I'm going to leave that there. And then the last people component is, I include a picture there of Bonki's daughter. It's not a family. It's a team. They are incredibly clear about that. You need to earn your spot on the team. But on this team, we care about each other like a family. So this is me and Chanel, my business partner. I've worked with one of my best friends for the last, 14 years. It's an enormous privilege to work with a friend, to work with somebody who cares about you. And when we work alongside people that are friends, people we care about, we are definitely more engaged. And this comes from, there's a bunch of research in the book that I quote that proves this. And you would know it from your own experience as well. But the reason that I have Kitsoff and Malcolm Marx there, Kitsoff says his closest friends, Malcolm Marx obviously, Faf de Klerk, Vincent Koch. They are the 4 guys who play golf together as often as they can. And he says, when you are under the line defending alongside these guys, you are thinking about, I'm not just going to make this tackle for Malcolm. I'm going to make this tackle for his wife. And I'm going to make this tackle for Vincent Koch's daughter. Because I'm not just working for my teammates, I'm working for this family of people around as well. And something we talk about often with clients is, it's not a family. I don't get into the idea of this group of people as a family. If you're not related by blood, you are not a family. You are a team. And on a team, you need to be earning your spot all the time and contributing, which is not the same thing as being on a family or in a family. So how do they create a place of belonging? They mind each other. That's the thing they use. That's the exact phrasing they use. We're going to mind each other. If somebody likes different music than me, we make place for that. If some of the players like to dance and sing and others don't, we don't mind. We talk about this and we say, if you feel comfortable doing this, you go for it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. There's a place here for everybody. Something that they did do was purposefully move away from just speaking Afrikaans. In the past, that was the main language of the box. Not all the players understand Afrikaans. Now they speak English as much as possible, so that everybody understands. The black players, they don't speak in their own languages because, well, as often as they can, when everybody's involved, so that people can be brought in and everybody can be on the same page. I mean, if Rassie had the choice, he would be talking Afrikaans because his English is like mine. But it's for the benefit of the team. We want everybody to be a part. You have to take an interest in the person that works with you outside of work. They know each other's families. They take care of each other's kids. They are a very close group of people. And something that they talk about is flying in the flying V formation. John Nienhofer spoke about the birds that fly in the front of the V. They are the leaders, but they're not always going to be able to lead. They're going to get tired. Somebody else is going to be willing to take up the leadership, and they do that. They can see this guy's not at his best. I'll step in for you. You fall behind and rest a bit. It's constantly looking after each other and minding each other and making sure that the guy next to you is ready and good to go. Those are the people components. So in the best teams and organizations, the individual contributors know what they need to earn. They know they need to earn their place on the team. And they do so willingly because they care deeply about the people they work with. I don't know how common this is in most organizations now, but this is definitely something that benefits everybody should that level of care and interconnection go up. Last component, the execution. I think one of the primary things that this team is known for is the innovation. And they create a way that works for them. I mean, in the last 7 years, the international season has not started yet. They've come up with a bunch of things that are completely new. And what Jacques Nienaber spoke about specifically was when we want to change something and people are hesitant to change, looking at, is this a habit or is this a tradition? Are we doing this because tradition is something that we value, or are we doing it just because it's in our habit and we are comfortable with it and we don't want to change that because we don't know how? And it can be quite difficult distinguishing those two things. So traditions are good for the most part. Habits are things that need to change should they become outdated. But if we just think of the things that the Boks have done over the last 7 years, is bomb squad, bench splits, things that most teams use now that never existed before. They changed the conditioning of the forwards to only play one half so that they can be more powerful. They don't have to run as much. That's why we're scrumming everybody, because we know we're going to bring on a completely new pack in the second half and just keep smashing people. That is a deliberate decision that they made in terms of conditioning. They are using hybrid players. Last year, Andre Esterhuizen was the first one. He can play in the back line and in the forwards. Now the French team started doing this. The New Zealand teams have started doing this. It came from Rassie and the guys. They use different methods to communicate on the field. There's Rassie with his lights. They told me about what the lights are for and what they mean and so forth. They deliberately design drills which they know the players will fail at to get them outside of their comfort zone. But the drills can't be too difficult so that the players lose confidence. They just need to fail often enough so that they need to pay attention. So they are constantly trying to stretch people and get them better in terms of their skill. They are, in the current last 2-3 seasons, preparing the team to play different styles. 2018, 2019, chipped, up and under kicking, chasing pressure. Now we are more attack oriented. The Boks can really play at this stage, I would say 3 or 4 different styles, depending on the weather conditions and the opposition, so that we become less predictable. I mean, the Boks also have 3 teams they can select, and nobody ever knows which combination of players are going to play, which makes it very difficult to prepare to play the team. And then they do things like alignment camps, which is a new thing. The Outfox games, where the players in the team room sit on something like a PlayStation, and they can practice movement on the field without having to be on the field. All new things that these guys brought in, which other teams are copying now. Let me just see how much time we have. Adrian, are people still around? Do we need to rush? If you can just give me an idea of where we are, please.
Everyone's still here on the edge of their seat, PJ.
So I can keep going.
Keep going, yeah.
Cool, lekker, man. So how do we become more innovative? I just love this photo from Coach Don. One of the things that he does, for example, that's the reason I have him there, is he's a farmer in the Free State, apart from being a scrum coach. And he takes young props to his farm. I don't know how many of you saw the photos on Twitter a couple of months ago. And he has them training on the farm. And he teaches them to scrum. And he teaches them to be really strong and to scrum and to do all of these things with this. He has this equipment that nobody else in the world has ever seen. I think it's something that he built himself. But he makes the props incredibly strong. And when they go back on the rugby field, they just destroy everybody. That's an innovative thing. So they go to the farm with Coach Don out of season, and he has them running in the Millilande and picking vegetables and stuff. And he's looking at them with this frown all the time, I believe. Because why? If he looks at you like that, you're going to do what he says. And it's a completely innovative thing. It's just thinking about outside the box. And that's something that I like, which I thought is useful, is learning from others. So what we typically do in business and in life is we look at the companies who give us a hard time and we get angry at them, or we become defensive, or we rationalize why they are actually not as good as they think they are. But a better way to approach this is to learn from them, to say, okay, they are giving us a hard time for this and this and this reason. What can we learn from them? Why are they so good? Why are they eating our pie? And we take from them and we apply it to ourselves and we get better. So it's not about copying other people, but it's about learning from the best in the business. Whether they are in your industry or not, it's incredibly useful to look at other successful organizations and people without losing your own identity and seeing, maybe we can try doing that. So a lot of people are angry at the Springboks for being good at scrummaging. The reason the Boks are good at scrumming is because they do it all the time. They practice it more than anybody. Then you get people up in arms saying that we need to change the laws because it's unfair that the Boks are so good at scrumming. What they should actually be doing is improving their own scrum and not trying to change the laws to depower the Boks, which is exactly that. Learn from others, train it more, get better at the thing. The best teams and organizations know that continued competitiveness and relevance relies on innovation. That's why the Boks are good. Innovate, always at the front. It should be a responsibility shared by everyone. We should be open to trying new ideas without asking for permission. I'll share something on the Boks about this now. Third execution component is knowing your aim. The reason that I have Lukhanyo on there is this is a photo from the 2019 World Cup. You can see the medal around his neck. He played most matches in 2019 and played the final, won in the final. Before the 2023 World Cup, he got injured. So for that period of time, he was the first, the main choice, number 13. He was the best in the world. He's a fantastic player. And before the 23 World Cup, he got injured and Jesse Kriel had to take over. And I was worried because this guy is good and I don't know how good Jesse Kriel is compared to him. And within that tournament, somebody else got injured. I can't remember who. I think it was Makazole Mapimpi, and they brought in Lukhanyo on. And he won the 2023 World Cup without playing a single second in that entire campaign. He was never on the field, but he was in the squad, developing the other players, making sure that Jesse Kriel was well prepared for the matches that he had to play. He also got a medal. He also is a two-time World Cup champion, although he only played in one. But that's the way that it works. If you're part of the squad, you are part of the winning team, although you might not be on the field. And it's this idea of, in the 1960s, when the Americans were trying to put a man on the moon and bringing him back safely. I don't know if this is a true story. It's disputed, but I love it still. Where John F. Kennedy asked this janitor at NASA what he was doing. And he said, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. And he never came close to a rocket, but he was essentially making sure that the facility was clean for the people building the rocket to be able to do their job there. And in essence, he was helping doing that because there's no more important and less important if you are part of the team. And what they do exceptionally well is they give everybody a role. So they have large squads. There you have the 4 locks who played in the 2023 World Cup final. There's Marvin Orie. He didn't play in that final. He played 2 matches in the World Cup. He still gets the medal. They are really good at, this is your role for this week. You start the match. The second group, you come off the bench. This is your role. The third group of people, you prepare the team for this. The people who are support staff, this is what your role is. Everybody knows exactly what they are doing. Just this week, we had an example from one of our clients where people are stepping on each other's toes because they don't know where one's territory starts and the other ends. There's no role clarity, or there's unclear boundaries around role clarity. And then what happens as a result is people feel left out. Things get dropped. Things don't happen. People feel like they are stepping on each other's toes. And it really takes a lot of consistent effort to make sure that everybody knows their role and get them buying in. But once people know what that is, they can aim at what they need to be doing. And the Boks are really good at this. Okay, let me not say too much there anymore. Role clarity is very important in any organization, in any team. The last one is preparing for success. They are exceptionally brilliant at the preparation that they do. The detail is insane. So one thing, I had the interviews in June last year. That is more than 2 years before the next World Cup. The next World Cup is in September next year in Australia. In June last year, they already had the designs of the jerseys the players would be wearing so that they can start preparing for that to feel how the jerseys fit and how the kit works. They would already know where the teams are going to be staying and practicing and all of these things more than 2 years before the World Cup. Their preparation is incredible. And as an example of this, Stephen Kitshoff told me, Rassie has an Excel sheet with 100 things on. And in preparing for every test match, they need to tick all 100 things on that checklist every single week before they go into a test match. And then after the test match, they look at the result and they say, okay, so what did we not tick? We got 93 out of 100 and the players performed this way. What do we need to do differently next week? So maybe the players had too much media responsibility. We need to get them away from the media, or they had too many sponsorship appearances. We need to do this more. We need to do this less in order to make sure that they are better prepared next week. 100 things every single week that they look for. I think that is exceptional. It is a hell of a lot of work. But they place more preparation, more emphasis on preparation than they actually do on executing on the day. And I think oftentimes in work, we just think about executing on the day and our preparation is not necessarily that good. This is one of the reasons they are that good. When everybody gets on the field, they know exactly what they need to be doing. And 3 or 4 other guys coming off the bench that could fill in for you know what they need to be doing should you get injured or should something out of the ordinary happen. They work incredibly hard at this. So that's the last one. The best teams and organizations take preparations seriously. They control what they can by focusing on the details that matter to put themselves in positions to perform when it matters the most. That is in essence, very short, quick summary of what is in the book. The book is called The Bok Way. And as Adrian said at the start, it's in all stores at this stage. It's online. If you want to find out more, I gave you a very quick overview of what is in there. In every chapter, there is a thorough description of all of these 9 things that the Boks do, with examples of how they do it, with examples from other areas and industries where it is also applicable. And it follows a historical view of where the team was in 2016 up to the last test match they played at the end of 2025 against Wales. So it's up to date. It came out the 2nd of March. And yeah, if you're interested in that, you're more than welcome to go and get it and check it out. If you want to talk to me, my details on there. My company is called Purpose Works. You can see it there. And yeah, if anybody has a question or anything you want to add, you're more than welcome. I know we are over time, but if anybody's still around, I'm still around. So you're more than welcome to go for it.
Brilliant, PJ. Thank you very much. A lot of thank yous and a couple of claps coming through and comments on sort of the great learnings and how fascinating a lot of that was. I think there's so many little nuggets that we can apply in our own day-to-day lives, perhaps kind of where we can improve things for our own performance and grow healthy organizations and be a little bit better for it. If anyone has some questions, pop it in there. They're just perhaps 2 I'll pose to you guys. Hang around for the chat if you'd like. I will also post the recording of all of this in the app later today. The first was a question that came in around is there any sort of insight that you got or lessons and learnings you might have? The Boks obviously do pretty well in choosing people that are best for the team. But how would they deal with, and how might that relate to us, someone who's already perhaps quite selfish, and making them better? How do you make someone a better team player? Or would they sort of screen it out up front, as an example?
So for the box, they do it in the alignment camps. So an alignment camp is something that happens before people get into an actual test match preparation camp. So they have about 3 or 4 of them per year, and they invite new players that have never been part of the BOK team, and they share with them what they expect of them. This is the way that you're going to prepare. This is the way that you're going to carry yourself. This is the work that you are going to be required to put in. This is the amount of effort that we think is appropriate. And then they get the idea of, is this guy going to be willing to do this? And if not, you don't get invited back. So they give you homework to go and do, and they make sure that they work with the provinces and everywhere that you are to look at, is this guy doing the stuff that he's supposed to be doing? They would even, for example, look at the recordings of how you practice when you are with your club team. And they show it in the BOK group, and they say, but why are you walking around during practice when everybody else is training? What is this? So there's nowhere to hide. But if you're willing to put in the effort, they know, no, this is the guy. This guy will do the job. And that's the character type thing that they are looking for. If you are a warrior, are you willing to put in that effort? They don't really care how good you are. They just care about who you are as a person, because they can coach you to be better. They are good coaches. They can do that. But they can't coach you to be somebody. It's more difficult to coach you to be somebody that is unselfish if you essentially are. And therefore they screen that way. In organizations, it's more difficult because we can't really fire people all that easily. But there are ways to, if people are on the fence between whether it's about me or about the team, there are ways to get people to become more other-oriented. But if you are just there for yourself, I would think it's quite difficult to, well, from personal experience as well, to say to somebody, if you're not going to act according to the benefit of the team, to change that. But you just need to know that that team is going to be underperforming for the rest of eternity if that is only about you. But most people are, in my experience, mature enough to realize when they are being selfish, and you can get them to a place where they understand, well, if I just do this a bit less, I can act to the benefit of the team more, and as a result, I will also benefit from the team doing better. But you get the outliers that are not going to be willing to do that. But they are the exception more than the my experience.
I must say, having kind of grown up playing a lot of sports as well, and the messaging that and maybe the skills I think that sports teaches you are quite valuable later in life. But of the many things, I think remaining coachable is one of the most impactful as being part of a team, and be that a sports team or a an organization or whatever it is, but be coachable. And I think it might be something that kind of carries through and we're part of that, right? So you might not always be a leader, and people on this call might not necessarily be a leader, so we can be that in one way or another. If an organization's going to start somewhere and they think, right, well, I want to grow a better culture, I want to be, do a little bit more for my team here, where's a starting point for someone to take this from?
It's a good question. We don't necessarily take an off-the-shelf approach, but I think it starts with remembering why something exists. I think it starts there. Because if people can start agreeing around, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why are we collectively doing what we are doing? A lot of other things start falling in place. It is a very much a philosophical, abstract type of thing, discussion to have. When we work with teams, we start there. It depends on what it is that you are seeing. If there are performance issues regarding individuals, you might do it a bit differently. But if it is about a team that is saying, we are moving along, we are doing okay, but we can do better. I think that is the starting point of why are you here in the first place? Why are we here collectively in the first place? And then the second thing would be, when we are here, how are we expecting ourselves to behave? because that is the thing that pulls people together, to say that this is our team, this is our tribe, this is the place where I belong, this is the group that I want to contribute to. And if people don't know why they are there, and the behavior is random and generic, the result is very often average, mediocre. Business results, team results, it sort of just plods along, and nobody's inspired by that.
Brilliant. So I think maybe that's, the perfect solution for it, of making sure you've got a why that matters and resonates. And if anyone has looking at building that culture, or how they're contributing to it, or how they can be a bit better in performance in their own lives and in the workplace, it's making sure that I think that's clear enough. And if not, working with people who can help you do that. And PJ is one of those. He left his details there. You can contact him if your organization has access to the talk feature in Strove. You can also have consults with him through the app. So please do make use of that. And while you are thinking about it, go pick up the book. It'll be a great read, I think, just from what we've had from you today, PJ. So thank you very much for your time. Fascinating to dig into it all. Hopefully everyone does think about these and take a few working points with them through the next stages of it, and pick up the book if you want, or chat further with PJ if you need it. So PJ, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Have a good day, everybody. The recording will go into the app a little bit later today on our YouTube channel, for those of you that have asked in the chat. So look out for it there, and then look out for comms on our next webinar, which will be in June, that we'll send out soon. Have a good day, everybody. Cheers.